Good morning, sixth graders. Today we get to do a really fun and unusual activity. We're going to write a letter, like write a letter on paper, to the oldest surviving World War II veteran. This gentleman's name is Lawrence Brooks. Later on in this presentation, you'll watch a video that will give you a little more information about him. But that is the purpose of today's activity. We're going to write this letter, practice our writing skills, and we're also going to learn a little bit about what African American soldiers went through uh, in their service to the country during World War II. So, why are we doing this? As I mentioned earlier, we're going to learn about what service to our country means. Serving our country means volunteering for the military when you're called, uh, helping others during a natural disaster such as a flood or a hurricane. But service is really just giving of yourself selflessly and not expecting anything in return. Now, the ironic thing about Lawrence Brooks and his service is that while he volunteered to join the military, essentially, he was treated completely differently. During World War II, the U.S. Army believed in segregation, which was common all over the United States, especially in the South until the mid 1960s. Segregation meant that people of different races were separated um, at public settings or in public settings. So this included, of course, the military, where there was units of African American soldiers and then units of white soldiers. At restaurants, where there was a section for white customers and then a section for black customers or African American customers. Schools and even towns. Certain sections of towns were reserved as the African American part of town. Other parts were the white part of town. So we ask people to serve us in our country, but yet we treat them differently. In a lot of cases, the differently meant unfairly. So, just a quick background on World War II, fought between 1939 and 1945. The major combatants were the Axis powers made up of Germany, Japan, and Italy, and then the Allied powers, France, Great Britain, Soviet Union, and the United States. 75 million people, soldiers and civilians are people who did not fight, ended up dying because of this war. The war was fought worldwide, but the major fighting took place in the Pacific and in Europe. About 10 million US men were drafted into the military, just like Lawrence Brooks. That meant that you were chosen to fight based on a number and you had to serve. Most men who were inducted or drafted into the military were between the ages of 18 to 37. If the war would have gone longer, they would have taken men as old as 45 and forced them to be in the military. Thankfully, it did not come to that. So, more information on our friend Lawrence Brooks. Born in 1909 in New Orleans. In 1940, at the age of 31, he was drafted into the U.S. Army to fight in World War II. The U.S. Army was segregated at that time, as I mentioned earlier. He was assigned to the 91st Engineer Battalion and stationed in the Philippines, which is an island chain in the Pacific, during World War II. Now, these engineer battalions were primarily African American because African Americans in the military served in what we would call labor or service positions. Very rarely were they ever asked to or even allowed to fight on the front lines. After the war ended in 1945, he returned to the United States and worked as a forklift operator, essentially for the rest of his life until he retired in the 1970s. So here's the video about Mr. Brooks. Your teacher can pause the video at this point, and then you can play this. It's about 4 minutes long. It gives you a little bit of information about him. And keep in mind, this was made last year on his 110th birthday. He's a year older, but many of the same things still apply. Now, once you've watched the video, your teacher will give you a sheet of notebook paper. And the notebook paper is going to be blank. The next slide I'm going to show you after this is a template. I want you to copy exactly what I have on this sheet of paper to your sheet of paper. There are 2 sentences that have already been completed for you. the address, the greeting, that's all done. Just copy that down. Then there are two sentences with three dots after them that you have to finish with your own words. Be creative with these sentences. Tell a little bit about yourself and what you like to do. Ask questions if you want. But essentially, don't be afraid to be creative. My wife is convinced that he will read these because he's of that age where he loves getting letters. So do a good job with this. He probably won't write back, but he's got a lot of time on his hands. And so be interesting in your letter. If you want to draw a little sketch or a picture, go for it. Don't let it take up the whole page, but a little picture might kind of brighten up your letter. When you're done, the teachers are going to collect this. And then I'll collect these from the teachers at the end of the day. I'll put them into a large envelope and I will send them to Mr. Brooks for his birthday, which is this Friday. Hopefully, the mail service will get them on time. Here is the letter. Um, if your teacher wants to pause the video here so you can copy this, that's great. I will also put a copy of this in Google Classroom so you can just refer to it that way. Good luck. Do a good job. This is important that we honor this man for his service to our country by writing this nice letter to him.